In 2018, Bryn Spetcher, a 33-year-old woman and novice marijuana user, was smoking from her boyfriend, Chad Amelia's bong, when she went into a coughing fit and began to hallucinate. Her hallucinations made her think she was dead, and she heard voices of paramedics trying to save her. The voices told her she had to kill her boyfriend to bring herself back to life. She then proceeded to stab Mr. Amelia 108 times with 2 different large knives before stabbing herself in the neck. Upon prosecution for murder, evidence of cannabis-induced psychosis was so apparent that the medical experts from both the prosecution and the defense agreed that cannabis was to blame for this horrific crime. Recreational drug use caused an inexperienced user to commit a terrible act of violence. Recreational drug use turned what they believed to be a fun experience into an unimaginable brutality. Under the influence of cannabis, Spetcher committed a travesty she never possibly could have imagined: the murder of someone she loved. Both Amelia and Spetcher fell victim to the popular myth that cannabis is harmless. Cannabis not only compromised Spetcher's well-being, but also extended to those in her proximity, leading to the egregious atrocity of murder. Spetcher is one of the many who failed to recognize that the idea of a simple marijuana high could not possibly cause something terrible like murder. In the 1960s and 70s, the concept of the happy hippie and cannabis were deeply intertwined as the drug was used for relaxation, creativity, and spiritual exploration. Cannabis, or more informally, marijuana, was typically consumed more innocently and often smoked daily and in social settings because everybody thought the drug was harmless. However, in recent years, cannabis cultivation has evolved significantly, leading to strains with much higher levels of THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis. This shift in the drug has the potential to cause more dangerous and severe effects. Sadly, America has become passively desensitized to the idea of cannabis usage, perpetuating a narrative that says marijuana is an innocuous leisure drug. Sadly, America has created a positive stigma around a drug that poses a threat to the health of its people. Sadly, more and more Americans are trying to fully legalize a substance that is savagely destroying the lives of its citizens. In light of the dramatic changes in cannabis potency, its adverse mental and physical health effects, and its potential to undermine the intelligence of the nation, America must shift away from its passive narrative and positive tone regarding the drug and recognize the inherent dangers it poses to its citizens, thereby opposing full cannabis legalization. The legalization of cannabis is illogical as the dramatic changes in cannabis potency endanger its users and lead to significant effects on our physical health, such as altering one's physical well-being, impeding users' ability to acquire and attain knowledge, altering motor coordination, and impairing judgment. New variants of cannabis continue to appear across the United States because there are few regulations or safety protocols regarding the drug. According to a study conducted by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the rise in THC content has led, quote, more and more Americans to develop addictions to the drug, with an estimated 16 million suffering from cannabis addiction in 2021, end quote. Many Americans view drug addiction negatively, and yet they do not view cannabis addiction in the same way. Our culture does not realistically acknowledge the destruction cannabis has on our bodies and our bodies' healthy functions. Before the 1990s, the THC content in marijuana was less than 2%. That number grew to 4% in the 1990s. Since then, the THC concentration in marijuana has increased by 212%, currently standing from 17 to 28%, and this represents just one formulation of the cannabis plant. Now, the United States has highly concentrated THC products that raise the concentration upwards of 95%. Today's users are either unknowingly smoking a highly concentrated THC product that could cause them severe harm, or they believe the marijuana they either are smoking or ingesting is comparable to the less potent marijuana from the 1960s and 70s. This lack of knowledge paints a picture that marijuana is not harmful, which is far from the truth. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, quote, THC is believed to be the main ingredient that produces the psychoactive effect, end quote. Cannabis presents a grave danger as THC ruthlessly undermines and cripples the vital bodily systems of our body. THC negatively impacts core body systems from the brain to the central nervous system to the immune and respiratory systems. The impact marijuana has varies depending on our body system being examined. For example, THC has profound effects on the brain. When consumed, it interacts with the cannabinoid receptors in the brain, altering cognition, memory, and motor coordination. These alterations lead to impaired judgment and an increased risk of accidents, which pose a significant threat to public safety, primarily when individuals under the influence operate vehicles or machinery. Moreover, long-term marijuana use, particularly in adolescence, when the brain is still developing, is associated with cognitive deficits and an increased risk of health issues. The brain is one of the most valuable gifts bestowed by God to foster a healthy and prosperous life. The brain is the powerhouse of all daily functions. When the brain is put in jeopardy, it can be devastating and alter the course of someone's life forever. One extra hit, one extra blunt, one extra day with this drug is not worth the consequence of changing the course of someone's life forever. Cannabis also severely affects the central nervous system. The central nervous system, or CNS, is pivotal in regulating body functions. First, THC triggers the brain to release large amounts of dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical in the body. The new dopamine release is one of the key reasons why many people smoke marijuana, because it provides temporary pain relief. Also, the formation of this new dopamine cycle in the brain is one of the main contributing factors that causes an addiction to the drug. Secondly, in the hippocampus of the brain, THC alters the way someone processes information, impairing judgment and making it difficult to form new memories. Memories are near and dear to one's heart, and one also learns from past experiences through these memories. Without them, one cannot learn to improve one's situation in life. Nathaniel Warner, a data analyst at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, experienced this firsthand. Warner struggled with social anxiety during his transition to college life, leading him to use marijuana initially during school breaks. However, his usage escalated to daily consumption during the summer months. Over 4 years of heavy use, Warner noticed adverse effects on his short-term memory. He attempted to cope with this issue by further relying on marijuana, worsening his dependency. Consider a day when someone cannot recall one of their cherished moments with friends or family. Engaging in activities like Remember When is a favorite pastime for many families as it revives precious memories and closer familial bonds. Cannabis ruins memory in this familial bonding time, which is one of the strongest bonds one can have. In addition, marijuana also affects areas in the cerebellum and basal ganglia. These areas in the brain play pivotal roles in movement and balance, leading to alterations in coordination and reflex response. Impairment of the CNS is a primary concern because the cerebellum and basal ganglia are essential in daily motor functions such as driving. At this point, the user is not only putting himself in danger, but also endangering those nearby. Adolescents are especially vulnerable to the adverse effects of cannabis. The developing brain and body are more susceptible to the disruptions caused by THC. According to the American Addiction Center, quote, studies exploring the long-term effects of adolescent marijuana use on cognition, brain structure, and brain functioning compared to adults suggest that the adolescent brain is far more sensitive to the chemicals in marijuana than the adult brain, end quote. Adolescents, one of the primary audiences of cannabis, may experience permanent alterations in brain structure and function, affecting cognitive abilities and emotional regulation. It is essential to recognize that these cognitive functions needed for work, education, and personal responsibilities are critical for daily life. As Christians, it is essential that our daily life must honor God's design. C.S. Lewis comments on God's design in his book, Mere Christianity, stating, quote, the reason it can never succeed is this: God made us. invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on gasoline and will not run properly on anything else. Now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing." End quote. The legalization of marijuana jeopardizes God's design to be good stewards of our bodies and the opportunity to flourish. The psychoactive effects of marijuana significantly alter one's physical well-being, impeding users' ability to acquire and attain knowledge, altering motor coordination and impairing judgment, rendering legalization illogical and dangerous. The dramatic elevation of THC levels not only impacts our physical state, but also leads to significant mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, and bipolar and schizophrenia disorders. A common misconception the population has about this drug is that it is not harmful. A significant portion of the population remains unaware of the various strains, compounds, and consumption methods associated with the drug. According to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, quote, 76% of the population believe marijuana is less harmful than tobacco, end quote. This knowledge gap leads to irresponsible use, where individuals may unknowingly consume high-potency products, resulting in adverse reactions and negative mental health outcomes. A study done by the Columbia University and led by Dr. Ryan Sultan, assistant professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia University, found that, quote, teens who use cannabis recreationally are 2 to 4 times as likely to develop psychiatric disorders such as depression and suicide than teens who don't use cannabis at all, end quote. Suicidal thoughts must be taken seriously, as no one should be taking a substance that causes and increases thoughts of death. We see this statistic come to fruition in Colorado where, quote, the percent of suicide incidents in which toxicology results were positive for marijuana has increased from 14% in 2013 to 29% in 2020, end quote. More and more Americans are dying because of this drug, and yet people want to legalize it? Would one rather have their personal choice and freedom and let their fellow Americans face death? As Christians, we believe each and every person is made in God's image, is valued, and has dignity. Psalm 139, 13 through 14 says, quote, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. God creates each of us uniquely and with a purpose in mind, ensuring that no one is merely a random occurrence, but has intrinsic value. This psalm emphasizes that God has a specific plan for every individual's life. With the presence of cannabis in this world, users endanger the beautiful gift God has bestowed. Users endanger their bodies, which are not only created in the image of God, but are also fearfully and wonderfully made. Additionally, many users believe that cannabis temporarily alleviates anxiety and depression, but that is not the case. Dr. Marco Shlomi, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Ottawa, found that, quote, when it comes to easing the symptoms of anxiety, depression, and other mental disorders, his analysis found no benefit. In fact, the opposite is actually true, end quote. Too many individuals believe that cannabis helps their anxiety and depression when it is actually doing the opposite. Dr. Beth Salcedo, a psychiatrist and medical doctor of the Ross Center in Washington, D.C., said, quote, I have patients who use it every day. They say it really helps. My message is that if it were really working for them, then they wouldn't be here with me, end quote. There should be no reason to see a doctor if cannabis is genuinely helping their condition and improving their mental state. Cannabis companies have marketed their products as beneficial for alleviating anxiety, creating a profitable market for them while endangering its consumers. Sadly, this destructive drug does the opposite of what its companies have promised, worsening the symptoms of their diagnosed mental disorders. Cannabis consumption not only heightens depression and anxiety, but also creates an environment for users to develop bipolar and schizophrenia disorders. The troubling thing about this is that many users and doctors are unaware that these disorders can be caused by cannabis. Dr. Drew Pinsky, an addiction medicine specialist, goes on to say that, quote, We, doctors, were always aware that cannabis was associated with psychotic episodes, but the previous suspicion was it was primarily people who were sort of heading that way already. Perhaps that's why they were using the drug. However, according to data from recent analysis and studies, people who have had at least one psychotic episode after using cannabis are almost 50% more likely to develop schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and the risk is even higher for teens and young adults, end quote. The culture Americans have created around this drug has caused many to discount the drastic effects cannabis has on our mental state. Cannabis not only causes short-term psychotic episodes, but also creates a substantial effect on the long-term mental health of its users. Chris, a standout student in his high school class, experienced this firsthand. He was valedictorian, president of the student council, and winner of multiple academic awards. He even was a fearless outdoorsman who was active all the time. All this was great until he began to smoke marijuana with his friends when he came home from college. Since taking the drug, he started to experience panic attacks, which was the catalyst to a decline that led to schizophrenia. Within 2 years, he was being medicated and hospitalized, which, in his case, did not help. This studious and intelligent child turned into someone paranoid and incoherent, which led to him taking his own life at the age of 28. Chris's story is not unique to him, as many others experienced schizophrenia just like he did. A study published in the Journal of Psychological Medicine found, quote, that up to 30% of schizophrenia diagnoses, about 3,000 in total, could have been prevented if men from 21 to 30 years old had not developed cannabis use disorder, end quote. Not only is Chris's story concerning, but also shows the lack of proper and accurate education people have on this drug, as they are using it to improve their lives and mental well-being when the drug is actually making it much worse, even to the point of death. The legalization of marijuana not only impacts individuals, but also erodes the intellectual fabric of the nation. One facet of legalization is the impact on the safety of learning environments in secondary and higher education. Schools should be educational sanctuaries. Any substance jeopardizing a safe atmosphere is problematic. When cannabis is readily available, it increases the likelihood of its presence in schools, posing a risk to both students and teachers. Readily available marijuana compromises the quality of education and the overall safety of educational institutions due to how it compromises the human brain functions. The result of legalized marijuana is an increase in drug usage among teenagers and young adults who may not fully comprehend the long-term consequences of marijuana consumption on their physical and mental health, as well as their education and professional future. In America, the number of teen addictions and marijuana use has soared to astronomical levels. A 2022 study done by the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health found that, quote, in 2020, 35% of high school seniors and 44% of college students reported using marijuana within the past year, end quote. To clarify those statistics, Longview High School has roughly 500 students graduating from its high school. If those students regularly took part in the use of marijuana, it would harm around 175 of them. If legalized fully, students across the nation will have access to this dangerous drug that affects their brains considerably, causing a decline in the future generation's education. Furthermore, research has shown a correlation between marijuana use and adverse educational outcomes, including increased dropout rates and lower GPA scores. A recent analysis using data from 3 different studies based on Australia and New Zealand found that teens who regularly use marijuana were significantly less likely than non-using peers to finish high school or obtain a degree. This analysis is deeply concerning, as it indicates regular marijuana use leads students down an uncertain path with no clear end goal or future. Marijuana not only leads to high dropout rates, but also leads to low GPA scores due to how marijuana affects the brain. According to the CDC, the effects of marijuana on cognitive function can make it difficult for students to concentrate, retain information, and complete assignments. The outcome is a decline in academic performance, which has far-reaching implications for a nation's intelligence. Higher dropout rates and lower GPA scores perpetuate a cycle of limited educational and career opportunities. When students drop out or perform poorly in school due to cannabis use, they will face challenges in accessing higher education and obtaining well-paying jobs. Cannabis legalization also sends mixed messages to the youth. Many societies discourage drug use, educate young individuals about the potential harms and risks associated with substance abuse. The normalization of marijuana through legalization blurs the lines between discouraged and accepted drugs, which leads to increased experimentation among young individuals who may not fully comprehend the risk associated with marijuana. William, a student at the University of Delaware, experienced this firsthand. In February 2019, Amy, William's mother, received a panicked voicemail from her 18-year-old son. When she spoke with her son, he stated, quote, "I'm sorry, I think I just smoked way too much pot," end quote. Approximately 2 months later, he reached out once more, still expressing his fear of being confined to an alternate reality and a looming sense of death. When Amy brought this claim to her husband that she believed it was his increased marijuana use, her husband thought, quote, "This isn't from pot. No way pot wouldn't do this," end quote. This mixed message that marijuana wouldn't do this is confusing and inaccurate. Legalization would exacerbate the conflicting message reaching the youth. Due to William feeling trapped in an alternate world, he is unable to receive the education he needs. Marijuana affects an individual's acumen, the community around them, and the nation, and the intelligence of the nation as a whole. Across our nation, intelligence and flourishing are in jeopardy. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, quote, as of November 8, 2023, 24 states, 2 territories, and the District of Columbia have enacted measures to regulate cannabis for non-medical adult recreational use, end quote. More than half of the population of the United States has been exposed to a harmful drug that is leading to the destruction of its users. Legalization would make a dangerous weapon available to the American people, undermining positive educational outcomes and, in essence, affecting the future generations of our country. One of the primary concerns surrounding legalization is its profound effect on public health. Advocates often downplay the risk associated with substance use, emphasizing personal choice over collective well-being. However, the empirical evidence suggests that widespread access to marijuana substances lead to elevated rates of addiction and mental health disorders, which leads to corresponding healthcare costs. For example, Dr. Alan J. Budney wrote an article for the National Library of Health stating, quote, while marijuana produces dependence less readily than other most illicit drugs, so many people use marijuana, cannabis dependence is twice as prevalent as dependence of any other illicit psychoactive substances, end quote. Legalization may inadvertently contribute to a public health crisis, burdening healthcare systems and diminishing the overall well-being of communities. The magnitude of marijuana use and its related repercussions, such as addiction and mental health disorders, unmistakably points to a public health and safety issue that the idea of personal choice cannot downplay. Another argument supporters of legalization advocate for is the potential economic benefits and job opportunities legalization will create. They promote that the new tax revenue will be invested in educational programs and rehabilitation services for individuals grappling with substance abuse. The Biden-Harris administration, quote, invested over $104 million to expand substance use treatment and prevention in rural communities, and $20.5 million to increase access to recovery supports. Funding that aims to support individuals progressing through the drug court system with substance use disorders, facilitating the restoration of their lives through the expansion of prevention and treatment programs, end quote. This proactive approach, seeking to aid individuals afflicted by addiction issues, is illogical and fundamentally flawed, however. The government is profiting off its citizens with the promise to help the individuals they are hurting by allowing legalization of marijuana to occur. If the government had never legalized marijuana in the beginning, it would not have had to set extra tax dollars aside to rehabilitate individuals grappling with addiction. Finally, the last major argument the supporters of legalization advocate for is how it would alleviate the burden on the criminal justice system. While it is true that the war on drugs, including marijuana, has led to numerous arrests and substantial cost, a more nuanced perspective is needed. It is crucial to assess whether the potential savings justify the broader social and health consequences of widespread marijuana use. Would one rather have more money or the preservation of life? The potential cost of increased addiction rates and mental and physical health issues outweigh the economic benefits of legalization. Advocates assert that legalization would allow law enforcement to prioritize more serious crimes. This assertion assumes that legalizing marijuana would not result in an increase in other illicit activities, or that the freed up resources would indeed be redirected to combat more severe offenses. A 2015 study in the International Journal of Drug Policy used data from the National Epidemiological Survey on Marijuana and, quote, looked at 6,600 individuals who reported using marijuana prior to the use of any other drug. Results indicated that there was a 44.7% chance that this group would use other drugs, a significantly higher chance than in the general population, end quote. While advocating for legalization and claiming that it will alleviate the burden on the criminal justice system, they inadvertently contribute to its escalation by increasing the likelihood of its users turning to illicit drugs, resulting in more incarcerations and a rise in the number of people within the criminal justice system. Legalization is just the first step in unlocking other illicit activities that the criminal justice system cannot handle. My solution to effectively combat the detrimental impacts of cannabis is a comprehensive approach involving legislative measures and education. Passing new House bills and educating the public, especially students and schools through substance prevention classes that specifically highlight the harmful effects of cannabis is paramount. Not only will these mandatory educational classes help students in school with substance abuse, but they will also illuminate society on this catastrophic drug and remove the positive stigma behind it. For example, the passage of bills similar to House Bill 3908 in Texas, which focuses on education on drugs and substance abuse awareness programs, is essential. The Texas Education Agency uses these bills to create programs designed to increase the students' skills to resist drug misuse and abuse, prevent harmful behaviors that may lead to the use of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, and educate on the skills and knowledge necessary to avoid misuse and abuse. There's only one slight problem with the House bills already in place for school drug prevention. They do not emphasize cannabis, which is why I believe we have seen such a dramatic rise in the usage of marijuana among teenagers in schools and across the nation. If proper bills were passed emphasizing the threats marijuana poses to our mental and physical health and the overall flourishing of the school, I believe those statistics would significantly decrease and the youth would attain the proper education to combat this crisis and not become another statistic. Teenagers are the prospects of the future for this nation, and with the proper education, Americans will no longer minimize the danger of this drug. This approach has proven helpful and valid as consistent evidence has backed it up. A study conducted by Life Skills Training, a school-based preventative intervention designed to prevent adolescent substance use and abuse, found consistent reductions in smoking, alcohol use, and drug use of 50% or more in students receiving these programs, as well as improvements in substantial risk and protective factors for adolescent drug abuse. When these programs target the correct initiative, such as cannabis prevention, the atmospheres in schools, communities, and the nation can change positively. If no action takes place and the push for legalization continues, adults, teenagers, and even kids who could be present in this audience will face the jeopardization of their mental and physical health and the undermining of the intelligence of the nation. The central flaw Americans, our people, fall into is the lack of education on cannabis. We must do better. Music artists, celebrities, movies, TV shows, and popular influencers all minimize the drastic effects of cannabis and act like there is nothing wrong with the drug, and we fully accept their actions and thoughts. We must take charge and go against the social norms the people of America affirm on the drug, and call out and properly educate the populace on what cannabis is doing to their bodies. In light of the dramatic changes in cannabis potency, its adverse mental and physical health effects, and its potential to undermine the intelligence of the nation, America must shift away from its passive narrative and positive tone regarding the drug, and recognize its inherent dangers it poses to its citizens. By highlighting the detrimental impacts of the drug on our mental and physical health, Christians such as you and me can confront this problem as an opportunity to promote a healthy lifestyle and share the gospel. I believe that attaining proper and accurate education will lead to a significant decrease in usage and an increase in support for making this drug illegal. Thank you.
All right, great job, Abe. Abe will now defend his thesis, taking questions first from the panel, and then I will open up questions to the entire audience.
Great job, Abe.
Thank you.
So, what do you say to the argument that people make of if it's legal, it would be regulated, so people won't be getting drugs laced in things they don't know what they're getting?
So you're asking if it's legal and it's regulated, then
is that one of the arguments for legalization?
For legalization? That's not one of the primary arguments that they ask for. One of the main ones is actually job creation, and it offers like 1.75 million new jobs, and it also creates a lot of extra tax dollars because everybody is buying this new drug. So that honestly really isn't, that I didn't see was one of the main arguments.
Got one more question.
All right.
So did you see where people argued that, hey, it should be legal because it was not as bad or not any worse than alcohol?
Well, you can't really compare alcohol and marijuana because alcohol has been around for decades, centuries, versus marijuana hasn't really come into fruition since like the 1960s when it really became popular. And so there's a lot of studies backing or looking at alcohol versus marijuana where it's still somewhat new, and so to fully legalize it across the nation it shouldn't be possible.
Hey, good job.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. So what are some of the states that have legalization of marijuana right now, besides Colorado?
So some of the main states that have it fully legal would be California, Colorado, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Washington, big states like that.
Okay, so if someone drives to one of those states and purchases some cannabis and brings it back to a state where it's illegal or cross state lines, is that a federal crime? I mean, is that going to be punishable even though they bought it legally in another state?
I haven't actually looked into that, but I believe that it would still be a crime because they have a possession of marijuana in a illegal state.
Okay. And my last question is, so I see these things at the store now, like for skincare and like creams that'll help your joints or whatever that have cannabis. Is that bad? I mean, is there a good use for cannabis? Is there a limit on maybe the concentration of it that's good? I don't know. Did you see any of that in your research? And that's my last question.
Yes, so I'm not really arguing against the medicinal side. I think there is positive outcomes to medicinal. I'm really looking at the full legalization of just total recreational use. But yes, like in the CBD oil of marijuana, there actually isn't any THC content in it. And so yes, that is the main ingredient that causes all these terrible disorders and things like that. And so the CBD oil doesn't have that.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So you talked about like educating the youth. In what ways would you educate like the older population? Like what would you think, like the adults and stuff like that?
In the same way that we have educational classes in schools, while those classes can be obviously carried throughout schools, adults are not in classes. So things like online courses that do the same thing in the school system could educate the adults in the same way.
All right, audience, you may now ask questions as well.
Hey, Abe, great job. You mentioned in Colorado the suicide people, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
The percentages of marijuana were higher now since the legalization, and I don't know if you looked into it, but it would be interesting to compare the states that have legalized marijuana, the suicide rates, versus the ones that haven't.
Okay, so I have looked at a few others. I know in Oregon, they have fully decriminalized all hard drugs, including marijuana. And so, yeah, I don't know the exact number. I can't remember the percentage-wise, but I know that has increased just like Colorado.
Yeah, it'd be something good to look into, just straight up marijuana legalization versus suicide rate. So, but great job.
Thank you.
Hey, so I don't know if this is a myth that I've just personally heard, I don't know, just throughout my lifetime or whatever, but I've always been under the assumption, I guess, or heard that it's, that marijuana is not addictive. Is that just something that we've just been sold, that idea, or are they putting like additives or things in products now that make them more addictive, like cigarettes, like I've shown in the past? Like did you come across any of that?
So, in the cannabis has THC, and when that THC attaches to your brain, that's the addictive part that it becomes, because your brain keeps wanting that THC to attach itself, and when it doesn't have that, then you're at a loss, and you start having like withdrawals in a sense. And so that's the addictive part of cannabis, is the THC in it.
Right, makes sense. Thank you.
Great job, Abe. Real quick, did you see anything? I'm wondering about the lung damage from smoking it. Did you see any of that come up? I've not heard. You never hear about that with marijuana, but that's all I've always thought about that.
Yes, so there is lung damage, and it can cause chronic bronchitis and things like that. I just didn't have time to put that in my paper, so.
We have time for one more. Anyone got a burning question?
Good job, Abe. I wondered, in your research with the short-term memory loss and the detriment to the brain like that, with people who quit, maybe gave it up, is there return or is it completely gone? I mean, do they have any tests for that?
There is a slight return. It's not as significant if you got off it pretty early. If you do it for a while, then there really isn't any turning back. So, yeah, and there's like, they do an IQ test for short-term and long-term stuff, and so there's a difference in IQ between the IQ drop between just short-term memory loss for short-term users and then the long-term side as well.
All right, Abe, you are done.